Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Hockey Sense. It's episode 93 of the podcast, and so happy to have you along with us. And it's a special today. We love doing special episodes, and this is one every single year that I look forward to because it is just a great time of year. It's the start of the college hockey season. And in just a minute, we're going to bring in Brad Schlossman, the ratings champion, the man that I bring in anytime I want to talk college hockey, just because we talk about it every day anyway. Will be on with us in just a second. Before we do that, though, did want to let you know, if you want to watch a lot of college hockey this year, there is a great way to do that with FloHockey. We have the CCHA and Atlantic Hockey, a robust non-conference slate as well, with the CCHA and Atlantic Hockey teams. All of their home games are on Flo. You can see games like Boston University versus Bentley, Michigan State, Denver among those teams, but then also the CCHA and Atlantic Hockey regular seasons all the way to their championship games. Sign up today at flohockey.tv. And without further ado, let's start previewing this amazing college hockey season that we have upon us. And how better to do that than with one of the great college hockey insiders in all the land. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, I'm talking about Brad Schlossman of the Grand Forks Herald. You know him, you love him. And Brad, welcome back to Talking Hockey Sense.
Hello, Chris. Good to be with you again.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you because while you cover the University of North Dakota and cover them really, really well, you always have your finger on the pulse of the rest of the country. I think, you're as much a national college writer as you are a local beat writer. And because of that, you're one of my favorite people to talk to about college hockey because there's always stuff happening. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. We're going to talk about, the top teams, which we're going to get to shortly. We're going to talk about conference champions, the college free agents that are always so interesting to follow, the Hobey Baker race, and then, we'll answer some of the listener questions. And Brad, if you want to stick around for that, I'm sure that people would love your insight as well. But Brad, to start us off, I wanted to talk about some of the storylines that are going to define the college hockey season. And the first one we're going to get to is there is an absolute arms race happening in college hockey. The last couple of years, it's been Michigan and Minnesota kind of in the recruiting wars and battling for the very, very best talent. Well, that has shifted east, and the Battle of Com Ave is now one of the great recruiting battles of college hockey. You look at Boston University, which will have Macklin Celebrini this year, the number one prospect. They just got a commitment from Cole Iserman, who flipped from Minnesota to Boston University to be closer to home. He won't be there till next year. Then Boston College has a number one recruiting class this year, and they just picked up a commitment from James and Michael Hagens for next season. James Hagens could be the number one pick in the 2025 draft. So there is a large focus on the city of Boston. And in this great rivalry in college hockey, I mean, it's been crazy to see. I mean, these are two teams that actually have a chance to compete this year.
Yeah, it feels like those programs have ebbed and flowed a little bit over the last decade. They've had their good years. They've fallen back for a few years. They really haven't been as consistent maybe as we have seen previously, especially BC. And it feels like we're about to go up the hill again with both of them. Sometimes new coaching staffs can lead to recruiting momentum. And both those teams have used their coaching changes to jump right into recruiting momentum. And they're bringing a lot of high-end players there. There's going to be some excitement with some of those players in college hockey as a whole. And it'll be interesting to see what levels they can propel those teams to. But I've got both of them preseason top five. So I think they're both back. BU maybe not as much of a surprise as they are coming off a Frozen Four appearance. But BC, that's a big jump for them.
Huge jump, and a really great point about the coaching staff. You look at the two coaches that are there now, Jay Pandolfo entering year 2, Greg Brown entering year 2, and they both coach in the NHL. which, they both obviously are alumni of their programs. Greg Brown was a longtime assistant at BC, and then Jay Pandolfo was an assistant with the Boston Bruins. And I think that the NHL pedigree that both of those coaches have, as well as their longtime experience in college hockey, Brown more so than Pandolfo, it has really lit a match, for the recruiting there. And I think there are players that want to play for those guys, that have a lot of respect for them. And so when you're seeing elite level talent go to these programs, it's not really a surprise because they've invested in the coaching. And so I think that's a really good point. And you look right now, BC with Will Smith, Ryan Leonard, and Gabe Perreault, the top line from the National Team Development Program, all deciding to go to Boston College, with Perreault being the very last to commit of them. You have that, and then they also have the goaltender and Jacob Fowler. And if there's going to be a difference between the two programs, is Fowler an immediate impact player, or is BU's Matthew Caron as a transfer going to be the difference maker? So we will see what happens there. Conversely, another storyline is I think that we're about to see a bit of a shift in power potentially in the Big Ten. Minnesota and Michigan have been the class of the conference for the last couple of years, competing for Big Ten titles, going to the Frozen Four last year, both of them. Minnesota, a goal away from a national championship, and just the agonizing summer this must have been in Minneapolis, given not only that you have that come that close to a national championship, but then you sustain significant losses to the NHL. Some were expected. One was a little late in the game, Logan Cooley, and then you lose your top recruit for next season and Cole Eiserman just on the eve of your season starting. And then on the other side, you've also got Michigan State that's had a big recruiting season and also a big transfer season. You had Penn State that picked up a big recruit in Aiden Fink, and that they've got some veteran talent on their roster still. So are we going to see a bit of a shift in power in the Big Ten? And is this a year where maybe we don't see as many Big Ten teams in the national tournament?
Well, I think on a national scale, the one thing, you always keep in the back of your mind, Minnesota and Michigan, they did get a lot of really high-end draft picks and recruits. But they also didn't win a national title. And Michigan hasn't won a conference title in over a decade. So in college hockey, you sometimes need some older players and some guys to stick around. The best team in the country last year was a team that had 3 drafted guys and none in like the top 3 or 4 rounds. It was Quinnipiac. And so you can win in college hockey without the first round picks. I think in the last 6 years, only one first round pick has won a national title, and that was Riley Tufte. May or may not should have been a first round pick. Anyway, so I think there's a balance here, and I do think the Big Ten is going to be good this year. I think 2 things are true. Hockey East is getting more of the really high-end young players, and the Big Ten is still going to be very good, and I think it's going to be deeper.
So deeper and maybe more competitive, you think, in terms of like a race to the top? Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
When I start looking at like their 5th and 6th place teams, I'm like, this is a good team. How am I placing this team 6th? I look at their roster. You look at, I think Wisconsin's going to be better. You talked about Michigan State. They're making a huge surge. I think Notre Dame people are overlooking Notre Dame. Ryan
agreed.
Bishel's back. He's one of the best goalies in the nation. He could win the Richter. They've got some power up front. Minnesota and Michigan are still my top 2 teams, but I look at that as a really good, deep conference, while simultaneously they are not getting as many of the top prospects as Hockey East right now. So it's a really interesting dynamic.
It is. And, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch Minnesota this year. Losing Logan Cooley and Matt Nyes is obviously, 2 guys that finished top 3 for the Hobey Baker last year is bad, but it's really what happened to their blue line that worries me significantly about their ability to compete. We're going to learn a lot about Justin Close this year as a starting goalie, because he doesn't have Brock Faber and Ryan Johnson and Jackson Lacombe in front of him. And for a few months, or at least a month, no Mike Kester either, which is definitely concerning for them. they do have guys that have come in, Oliver Moore, Sam Rinzel, two guys that are first round draft picks. They have a number of players that are a little bit older that are coming into the program. They managed to get some transfers as well, but them and then Michigan losing basically their top, three of their most important players in Fantilli, and then in Luke Hughes and Eric Portillo. What is the goaltending going to look like? But all these teams still have really good players. The question is how do they compete and contend with so much veteran talent loss? Because I think the one thing about Minnesota, especially with that blue line, those guys stuck around and were that close to a national championship, and it doesn't end up working out. But this brings me to my next point, and I believe you have some numbers on this, but the transfer portal can, as far as storylines that are going to dictate or be part of our conversation throughout the entire season, the transfer portal is another big one. And I think you look at a team like Michigan State, where they went in and they went after some high-end talent, got guys like Ike Howard, Red Savage, players that have Howard's a first-round pick. Savage has played in the World Juniors and got him out of Miami. So really interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, the portal is playing a huge role in college hockey. No surprise. The last team to win a national championship without a transfer on it is 2016 North Dakota.
Wow.
The last team without a key player on it would be 2017 Denver. And then you start looking at the national title winners. I mean, just go last year. Quinnipiac had a bunch of them, and Colin Graff was right at the top of the list, top 5 scorer in the nation. He was their leading scorer, just a really important player. The year before, Denver, Cameron Wright led them in goals. They got him as a fifth-year senior out of Bowling Green. Do they win the national title without Cameron Wright? Maybe not. Does Quinnipiac win without Colin Graff? Nope.
No chance. And he'll be back this year.
Even like to 2021 UMass, they had their leading goal scorer was a transfer.
Pritchard. Yeah.
They 2019 was Duluth, and was that the year Peter Krieger was there, and he was their first line center. And I mean, just these guys, transfers are playing a big role. And if you want some of the numbers, I think 279 Division I men's players went into the portal. 216 ended up at new Division I schools. These are both records. According to my numbers I've pulled, those are both records. There will be one more year where the transfer portal is very full, and this is because of the fifth-year senior thing. And then after that, I suspect it's going to go way down. I haven't looked it up, updated it yet, but I mean, we're talking at like 40% of kids in the portal are ones that only have a fifth year left. So you get rid of that, and it drops big time. We've got 6 Division III players going up to Division I. That's a record. Granted, like 4 of them are going to be a third string goalies. So take that with what it is. But if you want to go conference by conference, Atlantic Hockey's got 43. The CCHA has 43. Hockey East 36. Big Ten 27. NCHC 27. The Independents 24. The ECAC 22. A lot of the ECAC programs and the Ivies can't have transfers. Academic reasons for that. There are 8 teams that did not have a transfer. The 8 teams that did not, a lot of them that you would expect, Air Force and Army, the service academies. Then you get into the Ivies, Cornell, Harvard, Dartmouth, Princeton, Yale. And the other one that didn't is actually the University of Denver. So
wow.
They're kind of an anomaly this year.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And then, but they do, they don't have any new transfers, but they have guys like Tristan Brose that transferred in. So, those guys stick around for a few years. So just hearing those numbers, it's staggering, because you look at the transfer portal and you understand exactly how quickly things and fortunes can change for teams, and how you can plug holes that way. Now, you could say, well, is this the best way to build a roster? It is in the modern game. I mean, it just plain is, you need it. You need it. And I think that this also, the thing that I appreciate, I understand the frustration that it can cause for college coaches, but the appreciation that I have for the flexibility of the players to find better opportunities or other
Mhm.
opportunities, or they're not entrapped in a program that doesn't fit for them. And not all of these
Yeah.
are done because of that. There are certainly players that shouldn't transfer, but that's the way that it goes sometimes. So that's a big one. Really quick, I just wanted to touch on this as a storyline because I think it's important. Robert Morris is back this year, and now we have the debut of Augustana in college hockey. They will be a fully fledged member of the CCHA in 2025-26. Augustana will have their games, even though they're not quite CCHA member yet or fully fledged member. Their games will be on FloHockey this year, so you can watch the inaugural season of the Vikings there. And I think, Garrett Reboyne, he got a chance to start a program. Obviously, they've got a lot of transfers, as you would expect a new program to have, but they also have built a pretty robust freshman class, the first Division I college hockey program in South Dakota. So not a terribly far trip for you, Brad, if you want to get down
Yeah.
to South Dakota from the beautiful city of Grand Forks. But I mean, and having Robert Morris back, another team we'll have on FloHockey, on Atlantic Hockey, with all the Atlantic Hockey games, both men's and women's, with CHA as well here. I think it's great to have college hockey back in the Pittsburgh area, and certainly I think a wrong was righted by returning that program as well. But the one thing that I did also want to touch on with you before we move on to our next topic is the freshman class. This year's freshman class, we look at the NHL's Calder Trophy race with Connor Bedard and Logan Cooley and Matt Nyes and just dozens of other players that are really exciting. And then we look at the college hockey rookie of the year race. We've got some legitimate Hobey Baker contenders in here. We've got the potential number 1 overall pick in the NHL draft coming up. We have the number 4 overall pick, the number 8 overall pick. Another guy that could be a top 5 pick this year. I mean, it's insane. So I did a top 25 of the top incoming freshmen in college hockey, based on what I think their impact will be. You can read that over on FloHockey.tv. But Schloss, I mean, every year it seems like we get these freshman classes that give us a lot of reason to be excited, and this year's no different.
It's almost funny to me because Will Smith is so good and so elite, and almost nobody's talking about him because of Celebrini is coming in. It's like, how is a guy like Will Smith like under the radar right now? I don't get it.
127 points last year.
Yeah, I mean he's incredible, and he's a perfect fit with Cutter Gauthier there. So you look down the list, and you've got Lev Shinov, who's potentially top 5 pick the following year and was great in the USHL for Green Bay. Your list is full of like first round high end guys. There's impact guys all around, and you have to get down to 12 to see a guy I see all the time in Jaden Perron. And he's a 3rd round pick, but I think like a guy like Jaden Perron is going to be incredible this season. And when you look at that, there's guys ahead of him on that list, that tells you how really, really good this group of freshmen is going to be this year.
Yeah, and I'm really fascinated to watch the goalies. We've got a number of high-end goalies that are going to come in and likely play significant minutes. Trey Augustine at Michigan State, probably Team USA starter at the World Juniors. The guy who's his biggest competition for starts at the World Juniors is Jacob Fowler, the Montreal Canadiens prospect, who is playing at Boston College. And then we also have Michael Harabel coming and playing for UMass, a 2nd-round pick in the last draft. 6'6" goalie, wasn't expected to be going to UMass this quickly. He was going to play another year in the USHL, but things changed and they needed a goalie, and in he comes. And so how many starts he gets will be interesting, but he'll probably be Czechia's goalie at the World Juniors this year. So, I mean, you've got some real talent in the net. You've got some really good defensemen. You mentioned Lev Shinov, who is going to be, I really think a special player and a guy that, what I saw him in terms of his transition into the USHL in his first year of hockey in North America, just learning the language, learning how to drive, learning all these different things. And he manages to come in and be a dominant force at the USHL level. That's why I think he's going to make that transition so well there. You've got another draft eligible in Zeev Buyum at Denver.
Mhm.
It'll be interesting to see ultimately where he ends up in the draft, but and also how much he's going to get in terms of playing time at Denver this year. But every single position, there's excitement. And we mentioned the BC trio. You got Will Smith, but then you also have Ryan Leonard, who scored the game-winning goal at the Under-18 World Championship. You've got Gabe Perreault, who set the NTDP single-season scoring record with 132 points. And then you had Will Smith, who was right behind him with 127 points, and also had 20 points at the World Under-18s to tie Jack Hughes for the U.S. scoring record. These are the types of players that are coming into college hockey, and every single year we're seeing it more and more. And James Hagan's committed to BC for next season. There's going to be another, Cole Eiserman at BU. He could very well be the number 2 pick. So the freshman class just continues to get better, and it's so exciting to watch, and I can't wait to see all those guys in action because they do, even though, as you mentioned, it pays to be older in college hockey. But if we're talking pure entertainment factor, Adam Fantilli was pretty fun to watch last year.
Yeah.
Lane Hudson was pretty fun to watch last year. So we're excited to see that new
Yeah.
crop come in.
I think it's a mix, right? Like you need the high end guys. Like those guys were legit, really, really good. But it also, like Minnesota, they had Logan Cooley, legit, really, really good, important player. But what helped them is they had that mix too. They had you mentioned it earlier, they had the older D. So it helps to have a mix of both the high end guys who might win a Hobey as a freshman, as well as have some really good older players. Eichel and Evan Rodriguez, for example. Good mix they had there.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we let's keep talking about Boston University, because that's, I think as we look up and down the list, and every year the beginning of the college season, we like to think we know what we're talking about. We like to think we know what's going to happen, but it never really ends up being like that. It never ends up going the way that you thought. I mean, unless you're like, say, Brad Schlossman, who, picks Quinnipiac to win a national title, or, picks Denver to win a national title before they do it. And if you're me, don't look at my record. But, that's the thing is, like, it seems that the consensus has centered around Boston University as being the top team this year. Obviously, having an incoming freshman class helps. Having Lane Hudson back, who was the top scoring defenseman in college hockey last year as a true freshman, a legit Hobey Baker candidate. Bringing in the transfers, we mentioned Matthew Caron. Having a lot of guys from last year's team that stuck around, and guys that are doing an extra year as well. There's still a significant number of players, Matt Brown, Wilmer Skoog, no longer there from last season. But this is a team that, at least on paper, looks pretty complete.
Yeah. I think they do have a lot of really good players. The one thing for me doing some of these my rankings this year, like I felt pretty good about Quinnipiac in Minnesota last year. I felt strangely good about Denver 2 years ago. This year, when I look at teams, I see a lot of good teams in college hockey, and I don't see one team where I'm like, I don't know what their hole is. I shouldn't say hole. I should say I have questions about every team. BC, are they too young? The talent's there. BU, what is the goaltending going to be like at BU? Is Caron going to be the guy? Denver, they're so young on D. Corona's gone. Like if North Dakota lost all their D from last year. I just run up and down the list and I see questions on almost every team, and I see reasons why I think every team can be really good. So I just am really struggling this year with my picks, and BU to me does seem like the one that um, has the least question marks, and they just have firepower. They're going to outscore potentially. If Carolyn has a tough night, they might outscore that a lot of nights. They have dynamic abilities. They can all over the ice, and so I do have them number one. That being said, like, I still have questions. So
Yeah,
um,
I think that's fair because I was doing the same thing. I was doing the same thing, and I'm looking, and you could say, oh, well, what's going to happen here? Like you look at Quinnipiac and you say, well, that's a team that I think we overlook at our own peril because they still have a system that is tried and true. They still have experience. They're bringing back the number one returning scorer in college hockey, Colin Graff. They have other, like you look at Sam Lipkin had an incredible season. Jacob Quillen, the
yep,
hero of the national championship, is back. But do they have a goalie? They had Yaniv
yeah,
Peretz last year, and he was lights out and amazing and led them to a national championship. They had Zach Metza on the back end. They still have a
mm-hmm.
really good blue line. I think their D is going to be good. They have some extra guys that are sticking it out for another year. They have talent there, but it's like okay, they're unproven in net. They were when Peretz first started too, and he
They
worked out
were.
just fine.
They were.
So,
He
so
was
we'll have
great.
to
Yeah.
see exactly. But I mean, I think that's true. You look at Boston College, and I think the too young argument is a good one. The thing is if Jacob Fowler can be the guy that like he was for the Youngstown Phantoms last year as the MVP of the playoffs, one of the best playoff runs by a goalie in the history of the USHL, 952 save percentage, lost one game. I believe it wasn't that big of a lopsided loss or anything like that. He had one of the best postseason runs, and if he plays at that level as the guy for Boston College, that gives him a chance. But again, that's a young player that you're putting into a big spot. You're going to have potentially forwards at every meaningful position or freshmen at every meaningful position. But then you also have Cutter Gauthier. But beyond that, there are a lot of guys like Nikita Nestorenko is no longer there. They have other players that
Yes.
signed NHL contracts. Marshall Warren decided to use his extra year of eligibility as a transfer. So there are definitely questions about the Eagles. You look at, we talked about Minnesota already as well. That is a massive turnover on their blue line. And that
Yep.
was arguably as good as that top line of theirs was. I'd say that the D was the biggest reason that they were in the national championship game and a
Yep.
goal away from winning a national title. I mean, you just don't replace Brock Faber with anybody. I mean, he's one of the best collegiate defensemen we've seen in recent memory. And so there's that. But then the one that I keep coming back to that I'm like, should we have a little more faith in is the Denver Pioneers. They have had to make some replacements as well, but I look at them and you see them in the conference and it seems like they're always in it anymore. They have good forwards. They've got Massimo Rizzo back. I think Tristan Brose is going to take a step this year. They have some really talented young freshmen coming in. They've got some experience on their blue line. So, I think there are questions in that, are they going to have a goalie that can carry them? But what are your thoughts on the Pioneers? Because they always seem to be in this discussion as a contending team.
Yeah, I think they are a contending team. They're probably the team in the NCHC with the fewest question marks. I feel like the NCHC was again a lot like the national picture for me, where I looked at a lot of teams and there were parts of teams where I said, "Ooh, I really like this group of guys," and then I'd look at another part of the team and say, we'll see what's going to transpire there because I'm not, sold on that. Denver up front, they're going to be really good. They return all four centers from last year, which I think is a really big deal.
It
They
is.
lost a couple players like Carter Mazer, but they have a couple guys who are playing on like the third line who are ready for a bigger role. Like a Jared Wright is going to play a bigger role. Jack
Mm-hmm.
Devine is kind of broke out last year a little bit, can play a top line role. I think There's a guy Rieger Lorenz, when he played for
Yep.
Okotoks, he was a guy I watched and said he's going to have an adjustment period to college hockey, but when he's an upperclassman, he's going to be really good. I think he's going to slowly emerge and show why he is a really good player, because I still think he is. On the back end, when you're able to start with Shai Buyam and Sean Behrens, you have two high-end offensive defensemen that are going to produce. The big question for them would be they're really young beyond those guys on the back end. Zeev Buyam's going to be 17. As talented he is, 17-year-old freshman defenseman, it's a tough step. Boston Buckberger's a little older, so I think he'll have maybe a quicker transition, but he's a freshman defenseman. Garrett Brown, freshman defenseman. They have guys like Olvestad, who will be a sophomore. They have a lot of underclassmen beyond that, and a goaltender who we'll see. Magnus
Yeah.
Krone is gone. Matt Davis looked good when Krone was out
Yeah.
last year. I think the Pioneers have to like that, but still, it's a question for them. I do think they're going to be good, but they also are not without questions.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's the thing, is that, it's hard to know. It's hard to know. And we'll talk about some conference, conference champions in a little bit when we talk about some more teams. But before we move on, I want to also get to surprise teams. But before we do that, the Michigan State rivalry should be back in a major way. Just because the Spartans are finally going to be legitimately competitive in it. They're going to be another team that's going to have to battle youth. I think they're incredibly well coached, which is going to be helpful as well. But you got Trey Augustine as your starting goalie, freshman. You've got Artem Levshunov and Maxime Sturbak as two guys who probably will be among your top defensemen that are young freshmen. And then you've got a host of others. But you look at Michigan, we talked about some of the losses, but they are going to have one of the guys that I think is really one of the breakout candidates of this season is Frank Nazar, who was injured for most of last year, had a tremendous showing at the World Junior Summer Showcase. And if he can come in and help offset the losses of Fantilli, Samoskevich, he can't do it himself, obviously, but if he can help stem that, the bleeding a little bit there, they are bringing Nick Moldenauer. You look at that. This is probably one of their weaker recruiting classes that they've had in the modern era. They'll have some good ones coming soon, but they've been kind of the victim of that BC superstar route. But I think I also have a lot of questions about Michigan's goaltending. They've got a lack of experience there. They did bring in a transfer out of Atlantic Hockey in Jake Barzuski, but I really think that this is going to be one of the great. Anytime you see Michigan and Michigan State play against each other, I think that those are going to be battles, and they're going to be a lot of fun. And of course, I think was that the series where we had Adam Fantilli get his game misconduct that nearly cost him the Hobey Baker in the eyes of some. I think it was. But anyway,
I can't remember offhand, but
if it was them or Ohio State, it could have been anybody really, but I'm pretty sure it was Michigan State. But I mean, I think that's going to be a lot of fun. But before there are a couple of teams that I want to point out as potential surprises, but I'm curious for you. Who do you think is going to be one of those teams that we should be paying more attention to at this time of year?
I haven't heard a lot of buzz about Maine. And I think Maine took big strides last year. And I think they're going to continue taking strides. They have a lot of key players back, and it starts in net for them with Victor Ostman. And I think getting him back was huge. I thought he was probably gone after last year. He's a Mike Richter Award candidate. They've got some really good under-the-radar defensemen there. They're up front, Lyndon Breen, he's been a really good player for them. And now all of a sudden you add in a couple of brothers who are really high-end players that I think are going to make a huge impact right away. And so the Nadeaus are who I'm talking about. For those that don't know,
Yeah,
Bradley
yeah,
was a
Bradley
first
and
round pick.
Josh. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Josh has been overlooked, but from everything I'm told, Josh is really, really high end, and don't overlook him just because he wasn't drafted. He is going to be a high end college player. They've got two of those guys coming, and I think the Black Bears are back this year. And I don't know if they're getting a lot of publicity for where they're at.
Yeah, they could be a top half of the of Hockey East team. I think
Yeah.
it's absolutely possible. We're going to talk about Victor Osman in our unrestricted free agent talk because he had a chance to go last year. And the other thing that Maine did that we haven't had a chance to really address, they got a commitment from Artem Duda, who played in the KHL, and which is a professional league. All indication he's not on their roster. All indications are that that's not going to happen. I don't know what the current status of that situation is right now, Brad. I don't know if you do.
As far as I know, I am not expecting him to play. It would surprise me
Yeah,
if he did.
me too. It just, yeah, me too. And that, but that would have been, I think, they would have been among the top recruiting classes. You add a second round draft pick into the mix, who's a really good defenseman who played in the KHL. Like that that helps. So, but he won't. Even without that, I agree. I think that the Doe brothers between them put over over 125 points, up in almost 130 points. Or 230 points, sorry, in the BCHL collectively last year. Bradley was the draft pick. He's the bigger of the two, but Josh is a heady player, great playmaker. Watched a lot of Penticton last year, and you can watch Penticton this year on FloHockey. Shameless plug. So anyway, yeah, so we'll see what happens there. A couple of the surprise teams for me, they shouldn't be a surprise based on how they played last year, but I think Merrimack is going to be a very competitive team in Hockey East. Zachary Borgiel and Hugo Olas are their goaltenders. That may be the best tandem in the country in terms of goalie tandems. I think that those two guys are special. Borgiel got the net down the stretch last year. And I think he's a higher end guy that will potentially get some interest, but I like him a lot. They also are bringing back Alex Jeffries, getting another year of eligibility out of him. That is huge. And then they've got basically a lot of their core is back. And so that helps. We'll see if the defense holds up. They also are going to have a new facility or an upgraded facility that they're going to be able to play in starting at the early stages of this season. That's a team to watch. You already mentioned Notre Dame. That is a team that I think is a big threat to compete in the Big Ten because of Ryan Bischel. Landon Slaggert is an incredible college hockey player. They got 4 years out of him. He grew up in South Bend. His dad is the assistant coach there, or the associate head coach there, and Andy Slaggert. And Landon Slaggert is one of my favorite players to watch. Just hard on his sleeve player, gritty. He's got a lot to like there. But then they're also bringing in Cole Knuble and Danny Nelson, two really good recruits, among their best recruits of recent memory, especially at forward. And those two guys, I think, are going to be immediate difference makers for them. But the one team I also wanted to talk about, we got to give the CCHA some love, not just because they're on FloHockey, but because I think Michigan Tech is actually a really, really good team. They are a team that didn't have a ton of attrition, that they had to deal with. I think you get Kyle Kukkonen with another year of eligibility. Austin Swankler is transferring in next semester. He was the preseason media player of the year in the CCHA. The coach's player of the year in the CCHA in the preseason is Blake Pietola, who might be one of the best goalies in the country. Elite goaltending goes a long way. He covers up a lot of things. I think that Michigan Tech will score more this year. I actually have them as a top 10 team going into this season. So I feel very strongly that the Huskies are poised to do some damage this year.
They're also bringing in a couple freshman defensemen from that USHL champion Youngstown team that were really critical players in helping hold opponents
really
down in scoring. So, they did lose some guys on the back end, but those guys are ready to go.
Yep. Yep, and yeah, I just think that there's a lot to like there about that team, and they obviously have the structure too that will make them competitive. And the CCHA this year wide open, but most people would say
Yes.
that Tech is the favorite. But I also look at Northern Michigan as a team to watch. I look at what does Luke Strand do in year one? I mean, everybody's doubting Minnesota State. Is he going to turn that into some sort of rally cry for them? Plenty to talk about there. All right, we're going to very quickly go through conference by conference here and go with some conference champion predictions. Now, Brad has already done this in print, so it's cheating for him. For me, I'm going off the top of my head because some people don't have a lot of time to prepare for the segments. so, so, so Brad's going to look really smart. I could look really bad, and maybe that will be fun for you. But we're going to kick things off with Atlantic hockey, and I have a feeling we're both going to have the same answer on this one. Brad, who is winning Atlantic hockey this year?
For me, that league is the easiest one I had to pick. I think it's RIT and then everyone else. They have Wilkie back. They have the two big scoring D goalie. They have a OJHL player of the year is coming in. Like, that's a good team.
Yeah, RIT, very easy pick there. I think that they've had a really good program. They had, they had a good team last year. It's just, in the end, we saw Canisius move through and pull some upsets over some teams and then get into the tournament. But I think RIT is looking like a good bet, and also a team that I think is going to really challenge some teams in non-conference play this year as well. So watch out for them. Now we go to the CCHA, and while I think we may have just answered this question a few minutes ago, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Michigan Tech is winning both the McNaughton and the Mason Cup this year.
It is not, because I actually have Northern Michigan winning the league. I'm going a little bit off the board. I think they're going to score a lot. I think this is like you said, I think this is a wide open league. There are a lot of teams that have a chance to win it. And I'm actually going Northern Michigan in the CCHA.
Northern, and not a bad pick because they've got a lot of talent returning as well. They've got Andre Gontus, who was their top scorer last year. They've got they also have Artem Schlein. They have Benny Halaz, who was a really good goalie down the stretch for them. I mean, they were agonizingly close to upsetting Minnesota State in the cup this year, and I think that there were a lot of gut punches, and I think that motivated a lot of guys to come back. They also have some interesting recruits in the pipeline. We'll see if they're able to retain all of them. They did have a couple of losses here recently, but I think that there's a lot to like about where Northern Michigan is. I will stick with Tech as my pick to win the league. I think that I really do think that Blake Pietila is the difference between them and everyone else in the conference. All right, Hockey East. Let's go with Hockey East next. What do you got from our friends out to the East?
Well, I think we kind of gave that one away already. My pick is I'm sticking with BU in that one. I think they just have a lot of firepower, and if they have off nights, I think they're going to outscore their issues a lot of times. I like BU in Hockey East.
I do too. I think that BC is going to challenge them. I think that we're overlooking UConn a little bit too as a potential team that can compete. We'll see if they have the defense. I think they have the goaltending because they have Arseny Sergeyev, and then they also added Ethan Hayter in the transfer portal.
Yeah.
And I like that team. I like Merrimack to battle, and then there are always teams like Providence and UMass Lowell that can upset the apple cart in that league. But I agree. I'm going to stick with BU as well there. When I think ECAC, I feel like there are some teams that feel like there's a little bit of blood in the water. After Quinnipiac's won the national championship, will there be a national championship hangover perhaps in Connecticut? But it's hard to see anybody tackling them. Do you have somebody other than Quinnipiac winning ECAC?
I don't. I have Quinnipiac winning it. I do think Clarkson and Cornell are going to be on their tail. I don't think Quinnipiac's going to go win the league by 15 points. I think they're the best team, but I also think there's a lot to like about Clarkson, and there's a lot to like about Cornell.
I agree completely. I think both of those teams are really good examples. I think Clarkson badly underachieved last year. They think they badly underachieved
Agreed.
last year.
Yeah, I agree.
And they have some real pieces on that roster. Then you look at Cornell. Ian Shane can be a real strong goaltender for them. Bring in Ryan Walsh, who is on our top 25 college freshman incoming. 75 points in the USHL last season. Just a remarkable player. I got to see him a lot at Cedar Rapids last year. And it always seems like the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders, they get those guys, they get better and better as the year goes on. And then, all of a sudden you look up and they're, among the top players in the league. And that was true of Ryan Walsh last year. So we'll keep an eye on that. We're going to go to the Big Ten next. And again, fascinating race here. Who do you got winning the Big Ten?
I still have Minnesota winning it. I think they don't have the top line they had last year. They won't have a line like that. I do think there's an argument to be made that they are deeper than they were up front. I think their depth is really, really good up front. They're going to beat a lot of teams with four lines. There's massive change on the back end. I like a lot of the players they have. The question is, how soon can they acclimate to their roles? So I think that's the question for me. But still, when I look at their roster, I still think I'm going with the Gophers to win the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points. You think about guys that decided to come back: Jackson Nelson, Bryce Brodzinski. Having Jimmy Snuggerud, who, without Cooley and Nyes, legitimate Hobey Baker candidate, absolute sniper. Love the way he plays. NHL style game from Jimmy Snuggerud. Going to be a big piece of that World Junior team. I think that they have that. And then Justin Close has now had the experience of being a top goalie in that conference. I'm going with a dark horse in the Big Ten because I do think that there's going to be some real upsetting of the apple cart throughout the conference. I think they're going to beat up on each other all year. And at the end of the year, I think Notre Dame is going to be the Big Ten champion. I'm riding Ryan Bischel. Yeah, I'm going off the board.
Making them my surprise pick, and you're going even further with them.
Well,
so
that's how big of a surprise. That's how big of a surprise I think it's going to be. Now, I didn't give them that kind of push. Like we're talking like this is winning the conference tournament. This is having a good enough game to be to make it work. But I think that this is a fascinating team. I think Bischel is a real deal. We'll see if they have. The question with Notre Dame is always, will they score enough? I think Danny Nelson and Cole Knuble will help. I think Landon Slaggert's going to have a big year. I think you'll see some of their veteran guys. They always make it difficult to play against. I think skill teams are going to really struggle with them. And then they've got that last line of defense. So yeah, trust me, it's off the board. It's a shot in the dark. I already admitted that I didn't prepare well enough for this. So
I like it though.
Don't hold me to it. We're going to close it out with the conference that well, and as well as anybody, with the NCHC. And again, it feels like a very competitive conference.
Yeah, this is another one where I get down to like the sixth place team in my poll, and I say, you know what, this team actually could win the league. I think every team has a lot of things to like, and every team has question marks. The team that has the fewest question marks for me is Denver, and that's why I picked Denver as the preseason conference champ. But by no means do I think like that is like a cut and dry for sure going to happen. I think there are a lot of teams that have a lot to like about them heading into the year, and a lot of teams that have some question marks, and whoever answers those question marks the best will win the league.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think Denver is the team to beat. I think that's the group that you got to get through. I think that there are teams that I'm really intrigued by. Western Michigan, despite all the losses, losing their entire top scoring line from last season to the NHL. is hard, but they went into the portal. They worked some, they got some good players with some good experience. We'll see if the goaltending kind of holds up for them. We know they're going to be a well-coached team with Pat Ferschweiler at the helm. And, I think that they're on the cusp of taking a step. I'm really interested by the team that you cover closest, North Dakota. I feel like, they've so often been, very heavy on the blue line. And now it feels like this is a team that's going to have to outscore some of their issues. I think they can with guys like Jaden Perron, Reese Gaber, and Jackson Blake. And, I think it's going to be a really good team. Minnesota Duluth, can you really ever count them out? I don't think they have the star pop this year. They never really have the star pop, but, they have a system that seems to work. They usually get the goaltending. And then the team that I think could be intriguing to watch as they take another step under Chris Mayotte is Colorado College. They've lost some significant guys. Having a Hunter McCown not there anymore is an issue, but I like their recruiting class. I like that, Caden Mbarico could potentially be, a guy that brings them a lot of success in net. We'll have to wait and see, but I think Denver ends up winning the NCHC. All right. We're going to also quickly run down the Hobey Baker watch list because we're starting to hit up against the clock here. And I want to make sure that we give everybody some time to enjoy their season or their preseason nap and get ready. But hopefully we're up and prepare you. But we're going to talk Hobey Baker. And this year's fascinating because you've got the introduction. You already mentioned Will Smith, Macklin Celebrini, some freshmen. There have been 3 freshmen that have won this thing, including last year, Adam Fantilli, Jack Eichel, Paul Correa, pretty darn good company. But I'll go straight up with you, as you've been kind of previewing the season, who is your favorite to win the Hobey Baker this year?
I think the 2 BU guys, Hudson and Celebrini, are my picks because voters often lean towards statistics and goals. Specifically, I would give Celebrini my preseason number 1 nod. Now, we are talking about someone who is 17 years old, which is kind of crazy, but I think you and I are both in agreement. He's that good that he is going to be a candidate to win it as a freshman, and he's at the top of my list. And honestly, his teammate could be number 2, and then you quickly shift over down the street for 3 and 4. So
yeah, your top 3 is my top 3 as well. So here's the deal. Why Macklin Celebrini can win the Hobey Baker. I mean, yes, he's going to be the youngest player in college hockey this year, I believe. He should be a high school senior this year. He did accelerate to get this opportunity. But he was the USHL Player of the Year, the the Rookie of the Year, and the Forward of the Year. The first guy ever in the Tier 1 era to do that. Set the single season scoring record for a U17 player by a lot. And he also played almost all of last season hurt. He was playing through a shoulder injury, which got repaired this summer. So as he's back to 100%, and we were worried that he was going to miss a portion of the beginning of the season, all indications are he's starting on time. And so that's another factor. He's a 2-way center. He takes care of his own end, but he is a dynamic offensive player. He can drive a line. He can score the highlight reel goals. Adam Fantilli was an amazing USHL player. I have no problem saying that Macklin Celebrini at the same age was much better than Adam Fantilli at the same age. Will the trajectory be the same? That remains to be seen. But I think Max Celebrini, he'll be playing as a younger than true freshman. If he has a big year and helps lead BU to a Frozen Four, it's going to be hard to deny him. Meanwhile, I think his biggest competition is Lane Hudson. Most dynamic defenseman in college hockey possibly ever. I mean, just quite frankly, when you look at the numbers, you say, oh, well, doing things that Brian Leach didn't do in his freshman season as one of the greatest all-time freshman defensemen in NHL or in NCAA history, that goes to show you. And he's going to have more weapons this year. He's going to have guys like Celebrini. He's going to have, players that are older, more experienced. And I think, on a national championship contending team, Lane Hudson's going to be a big part of it. Meanwhile, you look at Will Smith, and the reason why him over some of the, even Cutter Gauthier, who's going to be a sophomore on that team, I just think that Smith is an absolute driver. He is a high-end distributor. He's going to rack up primary assists throughout the entire season. He's going to have good line mates, and he's going to be special. A couple other names to know for this. I think Colin Graff at Quinnipiac will not be overlooked. He had 55 points last season. A little quieter in the postseason than he was during the regular season, but a player that I think has a lot of potential. If you look at goalies, like I look at guys like Ryan Bischel and Blake Pietola, who are going to be core guys. If I think Notre Dame has a chance to win the Big Ten, the only reason I think that is because I think Ryan Bischel is one of the best goalies in college hockey. He'll be there. Very high threshold for goalies to win the Hobey. So obviously it's not a foregone conclusion there. I do think Gauthier will be another competitor for that award. And you look at some other guys I mentioned, Frank Nazar could be a breakout guy. Jimmy Snuggerud could be a big time player for Minnesota. So I do think that the likelihood of this Hobey Baker, it's going to come from the freshman or sophomore class. That's my thought, is that it'll come from the freshman or sophomore class this year. But it'll be interesting nonetheless. So want to keep rolling here because I want to get to college free agents, which is always a topic that is interesting every year. Maybe sometimes we put too much stock into it because obviously the number of guys that go as college free agents isn't always matching the quality of the guys that are coming in as drafted players. But when you look at guys like Zach Whitecloud winning a Stanley Cup last year, you look at some of the guys that signed the last season that, Hunter McCown got into the Columbus lineup and, helped right away. And Cole McWard has been getting a really good opportunity with the Vancouver Canucks this year. There's a lot of guys that are going to be NHL players. So I think we both have one guy circled as the number one free agent this year, and Brad, I'll see if ours match. But who do you got as your top college free agent to watch this season?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, things can change during the year. So we are very early on this, but using last year as a guide, like Dylan Anhorn at St. Cloud State was a really dynamic defenseman and really drove that team last year. I keep seeing Jack Peart getting on these all-conference lists, and I thought Anhorn was the better guy last year. Peart's good, but Anhorn was the guy.
Yeah.
So,
it's amazing what having a draft status next to your name can do for you sometimes. Yeah. But with all due respect, I think Jack Peart's a fine collegiate defenseman. Sure. But Anhorn, that's another good one. Yeah. So but who do you got? Who of all the guys, is Anhorn your number one, or is it?
Yeah. I don't know if I have them ranked, but I know the guys in the NCHC better than other leagues. I have, Anhorn. I have Reese Gaber, smaller, dynamic goal scorer for North Dakota. It looks like he's playing at a faster pace to me this year than he was before, which is a big deal for him. And just guys who are pure goal scorers, aren't all that common in college these days. And the NCHC's got two of them that are undrafted. They've got Reese Gaber and they've got Ben Steeves. And so both those guys really shoot a puck and I think are going to be intriguing.
Steeves is definitely one that I think is garnering a lot of interest. There's going to be a lot of guys that are, younger in their college career. They're not young, but they might be freshman, sophomore, junior kind of players that are getting this kind of attention. I do think that Victor Osman is going to be the number one guy that most NHL teams are going after. Goalies are often highly sought after, and he's got, the size, the ability. If he plays a leading role on a Maine team that we think is going to be a lot better this year, that only helps his cause. You look at some of the guys that have come out of Maine, and you look at Jeremy Swayman, and it's been a cavalcade of goalies. Jimmy Howard going, but you can even go back to Garth Snow if you want to. This has been a place that has produced high-end goalies, and it looks like Victor Osman could be the next one. I think he's a big-time guy. A couple of the guys that I'm keeping an eye on, it's not a guarantee that they're coming out right away, but two transfers that I think will be fascinating to watch in the Big Ten this year. Christian Fitzgerald at Wisconsin. I think that he he took off last season towards the end of the year, played some of his best hockey in the playoffs for Minnesota State. Now he's at Wisconsin. He's going to be under a little bit of a brighter spotlight. Obviously, Mike Hastings is going to have a lot of faith in him and the other guys that he brought over. But I think that particularly Fitzgerald is going to be, he's going to produce. He's going to have and there's going to be some interest in him. The other guy I think it's all about upside and looking at a player with size, and that's Josh Ernesi, who went from St. Thomas to Michigan, was the subject of one of the more heated transfers of the entire offseason. And there were several, but that one seemed to garner the most heat. Ernesi is, Big Ern. He's a big fella, and I think going to a program there at Michigan where he's going to be surrounded by some elite talent, we're going to actually get an idea of what he's going to do. Another guy that I think got a lot of NHL interest last year, but opted to come back for another season and transferred to Providence is Luke Chris. Luke Chris had he was played at Brown. He had a number of NHL teams ready to sign him to a contract. He opts to stay in school for a year and goes to Providence. TJ Hughes at Michigan is another one who would be a sophomore this year. I think NHL teams were sniffing around last year. He had a tremendous year at Brooks before he came to college hockey. And so now those are some of the other guys just to be aware of. Certainly not a comprehensive list, but a list nonetheless of players to know in the free agent market, because NHL teams will be certainly after them. And Ben Steves and Reese Gaber are two guys that I also had on my list, Brad. So, and Ann Horn. So yeah, so that's a good one there. Anybody else we're missing? Anybody else you want to shout out on the free agent side?
Well, on the goalie side, one big thing that the teams look for is size in goalies right now. There's no question about it. Dartmouth has a 6'8" or 6'9" goaltender, Cooper Black. If he has a good year, teams are going to see that, and just with that pure size, it has to be fascinating. And I know there were teams that were curious last year.
Absolutely. That's a good one. That's a good call out.
Noah Giesbrecht at Ferris State has a very interesting development path, and he's had success. I think he went and played Canadian college and was had an unbelievable save percentage. He went to Ferris, and Ferris was better than expected last year, and I think he was a big reason why. And he's 6'3", mm-hmm. So he's a guy that keep an eye on. They like goaltenders with size, and those are a couple of guys that have some size. And if they have a good year, they may come calling for guys like that.
Yeah, and NHL teams are investing a lot more in college free agency and undrafted free agency in general. Looking at Europe, looking at major junior, looking at college hockey. And there are a lot of teams that now have dedicated college free agent scouts because they do view that as an opportunity to find some diamonds in the rough there. So very fascinating to watch. And obviously players will emerge over the course of the season that we didn't even predict. And there are a lot of players that will get signed where you're probably gonna be like, huh? And that happens too. So we'll see what that is, but hopefully we just gave you a little bit of extra preparation. All right. Now it's time for the listener Q&A. Brad, are you with me? Do you want to face the line of questioning? All right, we're going to start it off. And this was a tough one. I think we touched on this player already for at least for you. And this one comes from our pal Jake, and he asks, who in the non-Lane Hudson category, very important qualifier, will be the best defenseman in college hockey this year? Mr. Schlossman.
That's where maybe I go with Dylan Anhorn. I think Sean Behrens will have a say in that as well. But I'll throw those two names out there.
I think another guy that I think is going to be playing an absolute ton this year, and that's the opportunity that he's going to have, I think is a big part of this. I think Seamus Casey is going to have a big year at Michigan. He is a dynamic forward. He didn't point it up in his draft year, but he got to Michigan, and there were times where he was on there. When they didn't have Luke Hughes, he was their first power play option. Now that's going to be him all the time. So that's going to be interesting to see. Not just points. I think Ryan Chesley is another guy at Minnesota who's going to have to step up And I like his skill set. I like the tools that he brings to the table. I think he's a solid defender. But odds are it's going to be one of those older guys that we aren't even thinking about right now because we're thinking about the guys that instantly pop in our brain. But I think there's going to be a lot of really good defensemen throughout the country, even if there's not necessarily the star power. But Lane Hutson is clearly in a class of his own when it comes to collegiate defensemen. Now here's a question about that Michigan Tech squad, and this one comes from Eric, and it's an interesting question that I think we'll both chime in on. But Eric asks, how much does Michigan Tech adding Austin Swankler move the needle? They were already looking strong on the CCHA this year. Does it make it theirs to lose? I'll let you start there, Brad.
For me, it didn't move the needle a ton because I still am picking Northern Michigan. You know, he obviously put up a lot of points at Bowling Green, and was a very important player for them. Bowling Green also didn't win the league or make the tournament either, and I think
upset by
Northern Michigan has. Yeah, I think Northern Michigan's a good team, and I think they're being overlooked right now. So for me, I still am picking the Wildcats. Does he help Michigan Tech offensively? No question about it. But we will see what happens in the CCHA. It's a fascinating league.
It is. And I think it can move the needle. I mean, it really depends. So, just to give our listeners context, if you don't know, Bowling Green is under investigation for allegations of hazing. Those allegations were brought forth by Austin Swankler, who also made that public on Twitter, which is why we're saying that was where the allegations came from. We wouldn't have said that otherwise, but he made it public and wants it out there that, that was his call. He ends up transferring. The same day he enters the portal, the same day he was named the preseason player of the year by the media in the CCHA at Bowling Green. Legitimate scoring talent, high-end skill. The question is, he can't join Michigan Tech until next semester because of the transfer situation. I'm right, Brad? He can't join until December, I think, at the earliest.
That's my understanding. I haven't seen much comment on it from Michigan Tech, but that is kind of the assumption, I think.
Right. And so also Bowling Green has 3 players that are suspended indefinitely. Their head coach is on administrative leave. So a lot has happened. We don't know the full facts. And obviously, Austin Swankler has put out there that hazing was going on in the program and that, it also made him leave. So what I would say from a hockey perspective is it does make Michigan Tech more dangerous at the most important time of the season. Even though Bowling Green lost last year, I think that Swankler was a big part of making them a competitive team over the course of the season. He's got a lot of potential to make a major impact on that roster. So I think the CCHA is theirs to lose. But at the same time, to Brad's point, Northern Michigan has a really good team and will be competitive. So nobody's running away with anything. All right. Next question comes from Iserman Season. And the question is, what should we reasonably expect from Trey Augustine in the NCAA this year? And Augustine is going to be likely the starting goalie for the bulk of the season for Michigan State. He has familiarity with head coach Adam Nightingale, who called him up to the under-18 team. He was his goalie at the U18 World Championship. They fell just short of the gold medal at that event. But once Nightingale took the job at Michigan State, one of the big things was he flipped a commitment from Trey Augustine to go to Michigan State and keep one of the better in-state goalies right there in East Lansing. It's always tough when here's what I know. Here's what I know about Trey Augustine. Incredibly intelligent goalie, technically gifted, low panic rate, good mental game. I think that there's a lot to like about him. He is slightly below average in size for a goalie, but that didn't prevent the Red Wings from drafting him, even though they have goalies in their system. And I think that he's just the technique that he has is really impressive. But we don't know. We've seen freshmen or first year goalies come in and really make an impact. I think of guys like Thatcher Demko. I think of guys that end up going on to NHL success and things like that. Or Devin Levi, who was technically a sophomore his first year because of an injury that kept him out his freshman year. But I do think Trey Augustine will be a difference maker. Brad, what are your thoughts just on can you be a contending team with a freshman goalie?
I think so. I think he will have a good year. A lot depends on the team around you, and I think he's going to have a good team around him. So I think that's an important place to start. So, I would expect him to have the majority of the starts there. I would expect him to have a save percentage better than 90. How much better? That's the big mystery.
It is, and we'll wait and see. But I think my expectations are very high for him. I think this is a very important year in his career because he's also going to be the World Junior goalie, and he played in the World Juniors last year as an underager. So keep an eye on that. All right, our next question comes from Blackhawks Brazil, and we're not talking enough, I think, about Frank Nazar. Do you know how he is? What line he will play on? So he's ready to go. He looks really good in the World Junior Summer Showcase. I think he's could be the breakout player of the year in college hockey based on what I saw in Plymouth. I believe he'll probably be the top center for Michigan this year. They have options. It'll be interesting. I don't know exactly what line he's going to end up playing on. I know that Michigan kind of did. They did have a preseason game already, and I forgot to check the line chart. See again. Look at that preparation, Brad. I am just on it today. But I do think that Frank Nazar is going to have a significant impact for Michigan. Brad, I don't know if you had anything to add to that, but I just think that he's going to have a really big year.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I'd add is a lot of times why certain players aren't being talked about. Everyone defaults and goes and looks at last year's statistics and things like that. And that's where guys who are injured can be overlooked. And I think Nazar is in the same realm as Dylan Anhorn. And there are certainly guys who did not play the number of games, so their statistics weren't quite as high, and people forget about them. And those are a couple of good examples.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think we also forget about with Frank Nazar is when he came in last year. He came in basically in February. So when everything is ramped up and he had to get up to speed immediately, I think he's coming in with a lot of confidence. He actually, one of his best games that he played was that game against Colgate where Michigan blew the doors off of them in the national tournament. So, all right, our next question comes from CFM. What's one regular season series that you wish, or do you wish you could go to this year, and why? Brad, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, I would say North Dakota at Boston University. I'm excited to go to that one. I think that's going to be a really fun weekend and some great matchups there as well, and some high-end players on the ice, a traditional, old school East-West rivalry type of thing. And I just think that's going to be a great weekend, and that's one I'm going to. So that's high on my list.
Yeah, you get to go. That's going to be a fun one. My answer is I don't need to go to any games. I've got FloHockey, so I'm good. No, I'm kidding. I among the games that I think would be high on my list to go see is January 26th and January 27th, BU versus Boston College. That is the first time they play. Will be in January, late January, for the battle of the two top recruiting classes in college hockey. That would be very high on the list. Also, they play each other in the first round of the Beanpot this year. Hello. So that'll be fun. So those are pretty good. So that's what I like. We've talked a lot about them, but I think that that's definitely high on the list to see that level of skill and NHL talent on one ice surface. That would be fun. All right. Skiu Ra is our next questioner. They asked multiple questions, but I only was able to pick one, and this is the one that I picked. Will the recent trend of elite players sticking around for a second and third year continue, or will we see the reemergence of the one and done? Interestingly enough, we've got, last year we saw Logan Cooley and Adam Fantilli kind of break from the recent trend of being one and dones. I think it's a case by case situation. A lot of players looked at what. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. A lot of players looked at what Cale Makar did and Quinn Hughes did. I think you will continue to see defensemen spend a minimum of 2 years. There were people saying Lane Hudson should sign right now. There's nothing he can do in college hockey. No way. I think that what I saw from Cale Makar's first year to his second year, what I saw from Quinn Hughes' first year to his second year, Keandre Miller, all these players, they were so much better in their second year that you had to, like that they walked into NHL lineups ready. And so I think defensemen will stay that way. I still think that it takes a special player to be a one and done. Logan Cooley's a special player. Adam Fantilli's a special player. Jack Eichel was a special player. Dylan Larkin was a special player. These are the people that leave as one and dones. So I think that we'll still see a lot of elite players take the extra year because it just means for most of them next to no time in the AHL or otherwise. So, Brad, any other additional thoughts on that one?
No, I think that's about right. I think defensemen take longer to develop than forwards. So if you see it, I would expect it is more likely to be a forward that's one and done than a D man.
All right, I like it. So this one is a little less college hockey related, but prospect related, and it does come into play for NCAA. And this question is: how much communication is there between an NHL team? And this comes from Alex. How much communication is there between an NHL team and their prospects before they become pro? Do teams talk to a player's current coach or organization much during a season? Is there ever friction between the NHL team and a junior NCAA team over the player's role? Oh, yes, random task, my friend Alex. It has been. So there's always the NHL team cannot dictate where a player plays. They can offer suggestions, but they can't really do that. There have bin times where there was such acrimony that the NHL team just said, screw it, we're going to sign the player. Probably the most famous being Garth Snow saying, Kyle Okposo, you're coming to the New York Islanders right now. We can't have you at the University of Minnesota anymore. And that's what they did. They signed him right out of Minnesota at midseason. It was very, very rare that happens. To answer the first part of your question, and Brad, I'm sure you've seen this a lot. Does Ottawa ever set up an apartment for their player development guys in Grand Forks because of all the Senators prospects that were there? Teams have a lot of conversation. I've been at a lot of games where pro scouts and or player development people are at the game, and they will go talk to the player after the game. Often it's, hey, how's this going? How's that? There's not a lot they can do. They give them suggestions. Can you improve this way? Those guys are always watching video of these players. The evaluation process is constant. For the more high profile players, sometimes they'll get more attention. Sometimes it's players that the team really believes in, but he might not be a top tier prospect. I remember Wyatt Kalynuk when he was with Wisconsin, a low draft pick, but the Flyers had people there all the time, and he still didn't end up signing with them. But they had players there, Shel Samuelson there all the time to kind of keep an eye on him and give him encouragement and give him suggestions and different things like that. So it happens. But Brad, I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yeah, like you said, after games, when there's scouts at the games or player personnel people, they'll come down to the locker room after the game. They'll talk to their player for a couple minutes. It's usually not long. A lot of it is just getting face-to-face with them and seeing how they're doing. It's not a ton of coaching usually, but maybe sometimes they'll offer some suggestions. Are there times when a team's upset with the college team on the usage of their guy? Definitely. You'll definitely hear stories of certain NHL teams that think their prospects being not used enough for whatever is the case. But that's definitely something that the coaches have to manage. The other thing I would I'm getting off topic here, but sometimes they have to manage these undrafted free agents too. When
Oh
when
yeah.
Zach Whitecloud was at Bemidji State, I think Tom Serratori had to set up certain days that they could talk to him because it was just too much. It was constantly all these different teams coming in and talking to him, and it was way too much. Drafted guys, it's probably more manageable because it's only one team talking to them.
Right.
And meeting with them. But yes, no, that they keep in contact with their prospects throughout the season. And if they are unhappy with the way one of their prospects are being used, yes, they will definitely let that be known.
Yep. Yeah. And it can create a lot of discomfort, and a lot of annoyance for coaches. But I think that's also a great point about the college free agents because the recruiting process is an entire season, sometimes more than one
Yeah.
season. And that's where things go, kind of off the rails. Wow. Well, it's been a long episode. I really thank Brad for sticking with me for it because, it's great. Before I let you go, who was the Grand Forks Herald's pick for national champion this year?
Well, I haven't published it yet, but it's like 95% going to be BU.
Ooh, 95%.
So
That leaves. So you're
yeah,
saying there's a chance that it's not
there's
BU,
a chance.
a
And the
5%
reason I
chance.
say 95% is because last year when I penciled in, I actually did pencil in Minnesota right away. And I slept on it and I woke up the next morning and I said, nope, going with Quinnipiac. And I switched it at the last minute. So you just never know when I'm going to do that before I hit publish. There's always that threat, but the way I'm leaning right now is with the consensus for the first time in a few years. I was off the board the last couple of years, and I'm highly disappointed in myself for going with the consensus. And I'm not going to be unique this year, probably, unless I can dig up something else in the next couple hours.
Yeah, I don't know if there's enough secret stats that we can find that'll help us make these decisions. But Brad, I thank you so much for joining me this week and every year. I think this is the third time we've done the college hockey preview together, and I really do appreciate it. So, Brad, I'll let you get on with the rest of your day, and I'll go ahead and close this show by myself. But thanks so much for joining me on Talking Hockey Sense.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris.
All right, that was Brad Schlossman. You can follow him at SchlossmanGF on Twitter or X or whatever you're calling it now. And I also want to remind you that you can subscribe to this podcast on your audio apps of choice. You can also watch it on YouTube and FloHockey.tv. We post the episodes everywhere, so you can either watch or listen. And if you are on one of those audio apps, please do leave a kind rating and review. It really does help the show. I am so excited for this college season. I hope that you guys are too. Don't forget to subscribe to FloHockey. Get that annual pass because we've got not just the CCHA and Atlantic Hockey, but the USHL, a lot of these feeder leagues to college hockey, the BCHL, the CJHL, so much of that. And then also, of course, our professional leagues, the ECHL and the SPHL this year. So very excited to have so much great hockey on FloHockey throughout the year. Make sure you are signed up so you don't miss any of it. And don't miss this show next week. We'll be talking lots more about college hockey, about prospects, and so many different things. We thank you for joining us on this week's edition of Talking Hockey Sense. My name is Chris Peters. We'll catch you next time.